I did not think my journey would be writing. This one it was like snippets of the story, and it was black and white, and the characters didn't have any names.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden the story started to come in color, and I went into the shower, turned it on, and it was like, as I turned on the shower, this story, the names, the characters, everything flowed. And I ran and got my computer, and I said, for 25 years, I had this story in my head, and I never thought to write it. Always thought it would be a great show, a great limited series or something, but you have to write it.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Adeptus On-Air. I am again your host, Mike Hoffman, and today I am joined by author and singer-songwriter Beth Pellino-Dudzic. Beth, how are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
I appreciate you having me here. Wherever you are, it's a sunny day. I can see the sun coming through those windows.
Well, it's sunny, but it's cold, actually. And I'm in Alabama, so we've been having some really cold weather.
Now, how do you define cold?
Well, I'm a New Yorker, so when you live down south and your thermostat says 27 degrees outside, it's pretty cold.
Yeah, it's funny. Lately, when I look at my weather app in the morning and I see 27 degrees, I'm like, oh, it's going to be warm today.
Yeah. Well, I remember those days in New York, shoveling snow, shoveling my car out.
Yeah, the forecast coming up now, looks like we have some single-digit days in our future. So it's days like that I really hate walking dogs. So
yeah, well, my dog has her backyard, and I walked her before, and she decided I want to go in the front yard. So okay, where are you, in Chicago or someplace?
We're on the East Coast. I'm in New Jersey.
Oh, Jersey. Okay. Well, I'm a New York girl, so.
There you go. So perfect. Yeah. So don't give me that New York attitude, though. Okay.
I will not. That only comes out when people are mean to me, and then.
All right. I promise I have no mean-spirited questions here whatsoever.
I wouldn't do that.
We should be good. So from a little background, you're an author, a singer-songwriter, born and raised in Westchester County. You've authored a 6-book romance series called Perfection Saga. First 2 are published, third set to be released this year, and I think the rest of them, from what I gather, are already kind of written, or majority of them are written.
Yes, I started book 5, and when I looked at the word count, because your publishing consultant and editor look at the word count, and book 5 has 170,000 words, and they're like, oh, that's 2 books. So I will move part of book 5 into book 6.
And your storyline or whatever it is going to end in book 6. I mean, you have an ending in mind.
I do have an ending in mind. And here's the funny thing. When I started the journey and I wrote book 1, it was, again, probably 180,000 words. And here's the thing about self-publishing. You have to find a good team.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of bad self-publishing companies out there. And I had a publishing consultant who had me interview editors and interview, the artists for my book covers. And I was lucky 3 of them already had worked together. And the woman who's my editor read it, and she said, first of all, this is 2 books.
Right.
And she said, I love the story. I love where you're going. I get the character. And when we started to be done with book 2, she said, continue writing the story, write book 3. And book 3 turned into 3 and 4. And I realized that the way I want to tell the story, or at least tell it and finish it, will take 6 books. And I'm okay with book 5 and book 6 being a little bit longer than the true romance genre.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do the storyline as I see it.
Right. Now, here's the interesting thing. I always find this interesting because I don't have that creative part of my brain. So when you're writing book 1, you're obviously at that point in time, as you just said, you're not necessarily envisioning a 6-book series. So you've kind of had a change in your mind the trajectory of your characters. And obviously you kind of know where you want it to end, but there's obviously so many things that can happen from point A to point B. And
Yes.
to make 6 books entertaining, I imagine you have to kind of come up with, conflict, adventure in the middle, but at
Exactly.
the same point in time, ultimately still getting to your end game.
Yes, and it just organically came, and I was writing and I said, "Oh, I'm gonna put this in there." Like you said, the conflict. And there are 2 antagonists in the story that flow through the books. And I just said, okay, life isn't always perfect. And so they have certain things that the 2 main characters go
Yeah.
through. And as I'm writing it, then all the sparks like start happening where it's like, oh, this is where I'm going to take them on this. This is so I know where it's going to end, and I am going to put chaos in book 5 and book 6. And when I talked to my mother about, okay, so I'm writing this, and she's like, why are you doing that? That's, that's so sad. And I said, Mom, it can't be. It's a romance series. It's about rock and roll. But I said, you need to have the ups and downs. And otherwise, why do people want to read it? If it's
Right.
just all wonderful, you have to throw in some significant conflict. And there are a couple of storylines that will run through all the way to book 6.
Yeah.
So, and you just build on that conflict. And that makes the story interesting.
Of course, you're right. If in chapter 1, guy meets girl, and just chapters 2 through 12 are just them dating, and chapter 13 is the wedding. What have we read?
Exactly. And there are so many ups and downs that go through. Like when I was writing book 2, it was, and I would reread it, and I would start to cry in certain parts of the book. And there were times when I was telling my mother what I was doing, and I would start to cry. And I said, see, I am so in tune with the character, all of them, but especially the female character. So I always say, she's me, I'm her. So even though I'm the writer, I'm feeling the pain that she's feeling, which is a weird kind of symbiotic relationship. And I will say that a lot of things in the book are me. I put in things that have happened to me, things that were said to me. And I based it on an Italian girl from Long Island. I'm from Westchester, and there's always the Westchester, Long Island thing.
Sure.
But most of my family lived out in the island, so that was easy. But so there are certain types of mannerisms coming from an Italian family, and I am an Italian girl. So sometimes people are like, why is she using, why does the family they're always swearing at each other? And I said, you've never lived in an Italian family. Where I had 3 brothers. So yeah.
Yeah, the curses were flowing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's authentic. It's not, I didn't just put them in there. It's the way that I would have spoken.
Right.
And there are sometimes when I'll write something and you get distracted, or there's something you have to do, and then I go back and I read 20 pages and I say her loud, and I'm like, no, she wouldn't say it like that. She would say it this way.
Right.
So I am so connected to the character. And like I said, there are things in the book that actually happened to me or are parts of my life that I put in there.
That's neat. So I always find this interesting. So obviously most of your writing is in the romance genre. How did that come about? Was that, a lot of people grow up, I want to be a writer, I want to do this, but was romance always the way you felt your journey was going to go?
I did not think my journey would be writing.
Okay.
But over 25 years, and I do have 3 other stories that I have thought through for the last 25 years, and this story just started to, and I explain it this way, that and the other stories do come out, but I always say, go back on the shelf, I'm not ready for you. Um, and this one just, it was like snippets of the story, and it was black and white, and the characters didn't have any names.
Mm-hmm.
And probably about a year and a half ago, because my first book was published in April. And when I started writing it, it was just like a continual flow. But I was cleaning my house, and then all of a sudden the story started to come in color. And I went into the shower, turned it on, and it was like, as I turned on the shower, the story, the names, the
Mm-hmm.
characters, everything flowed. And I ran and got my computer, and I said, for 25 years, I had this story in my head, and I never thought to write it. I always thought it would be a great show, a great limited series or
Mm-hmm.
something, but you have to write it.
Yeah.
And I decided now's the time to write it. And the other stories will be coming out. Like, I started writing the second book,
Mm-hmm.
and once my editor said, continue the story, that's been kind of like left on my computer as something to go back to. But the basis, I think, for this story was back in the day. Yes, did I want to sing? And when you're 18, 19, 20, you don't have, at least did not have, the strength, or I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not. And so instead of taking that leap of faith, which you probably should have but didn't,
Yeah.
I kind of quelled that. And when I was going to college, I thought, okay, well, I'll take acting. And my parents were like, no,
Yeah.
you're
No,
going to
absolutely not.
you're
Yeah.
gonna, and I'm living in New York City,
Right.
right? So it's like, well, I'm right down the street from everything.
Yeah.
And so I had a bunch of friends, and really the way I got introduced to the music scene was I was dating a guy, and he is actually in the book. I was dating a guy who was a roadie for, and being from Jersey, you would know that back in the day, the club scene was very big.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one guy who basically, and I'm not talking about some of the clubs in New York City, they were a separate thing. But if you wanted to play in Long Island or New York or Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
or Connecticut, this one guy kind of controlled everything. And there was one band, and they were the top band. They were the one that everybody wanted to see. So he was a roadie for them, and so I got introduced to these guys, and they were lifelong friends. I mean, 2 of them met my children when I moved back to New York.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got in immediately with the best of the best. And my name was always left at the door.
Yeah.
So, and
That's always nice.
I was actually underage at that time. I was like 16. And then you meet other bands,
Mm-hmm.
and then they become your friends. And then I started dating somebody from another band, and it was kind of boyfriend live-in situation. And when you're that deep into it, it's like your life changes.
Mm-hmm.
You So I got to know all these people, and I got to see the how everybody wants that record contract, because back in the day, that it was a promoter from a record label who came to see you and decided, we'll do a demo.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody was striving for. And the one thing is that you could be a great cover band, and these guys were the most prolific musicians. They were unbelievable, and they played more of a progressive kind of music. But they didn't have the original songs, and that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, of course.
So I got to see, and the backstabbing and how groups will say, okay, it's fired and we're going to add another guy. And then they change the band.
Yep.
And the band that the ex-boyfriend was in, there was a guy and he's like, I'm going to be your manager. And, it was hard back in the day to get studio time.
Sure.
So it was like outfitting them out and all of this. And they started doing some original songs. And boom, one day it was like, you're fired, you're fired. And when you do that, it changes the band, right? It changes the complex of the band,
Yeah, of course.
the way the band looks. So yeah, you see that kind of thing. And then and then you start meeting other people. And I had a friend, well, I don't know I do know where she is, but we're in touch and then we're not in touch. Her brother was, and you probably remember this, Don Kirshner's rock concert on TV, or Midnight Special, or whatever those shows were. And he was in London, and it was a big deal. Like they were going to highlight them on one of these shows via London, and they were singing this song, and it was like, oh, cool, whatever.
Right.
And he married a very famous actress, like in the 40s kind of thing. And he married her daughter. And then he came to California. And literally, I was in the supermarket with my daughters, and I heard this song. And I was singing to it, but it was Joan Jett singing it. And it was I Love Rock and Roll. So, and I said, wait, that's not a Joan Jett song.
Right.
That song was my friend's brother's song. And I later found out that he managed her, and that's why she got that song. So, and she had a big 30th birthday party. And I remember, there were rockers there, and this person had a very famous sister who was doing a show on Broadway. And, she kind of floated in, and, I was just like, okay. I have met so many of those type of people, and I'm just, you're no different from me. And I don't get that fangirl thing in me. But at this party, I was sitting next to this guy, and we're talking, and, everything is great dinner talk. And he turned to me and he says, so after this, you want to go to my club? And I kind of laughed. I'm like, oh, what club does this guy have? It was Studio 54. I was sitting next to Steve Rebell, and he was like, after the party, everybody's coming to, the club. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll go. I mean, so I wasn't like, oh my God, it's Steve Rebell. It was just like, oh, yeah, I'm sure after the party, I'm good with that. And then I had a friend, that same girlfriend, we met a guy who was the promotional manager for a very big record company. And he took us backstage to concerts and all that kind of thing. And it was the era of, going into a party and there was a pile of cocaine. Right? That was
back in the day.
That was the thing. And I remember we went to this party out Long Island, and they had gotten like 2 connecting rooms. And I remember walking in and seeing just this pile of cocaine. I was like, okay. And it was, they had DJs from, New York. Long Island had a really good, and I think they still do, WLIR. It was a big radio station back in the day. And I noticed, and this person had a friend with him, and I started noticing that the people coming into the party were all males.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one female disc jockey. And I turned to my girlfriend and I said, we need to leave.
Yeah.
And she's like, why? I said, we are the only females here.
Right.
And I said, this is going to turn bad. So we need to go. And she was kind of looking around, and I said, no, we need to go. And as we were leaving, Keith Moon showed up to this party, and he was in boxer shorts, drunk. I mean, he was really drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a lot of those kinds of stories,
Yeah.
and they're fun. And I did get a degree in business administration, and you get to a crossroads where it's like, I have this rock and roll life.
Mm-hmm.
And I did try to start a female band with a couple of friends of mine. It was called Hardware. And we kind of didn't get too far, but
Mm-hmm.
we
Well,
did.
there's such competition there, obviously.
Well, and my thing was, I didn't want to sing the female songs. And like Heart was out, and Pat Benatar, and they were all great. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm
of
not
course.
knocking them, but I wanted to sing Led Zeppelin. I wanted to sing what the guys were singing, Bad Company, whatever
Yeah,
it was. I did not want to do something, and so that was the difference, right? I wanted to do something that the guys were doing
yeah,
as a female.
yeah. Understood. Yeah, those were definitely crazy times back then, especially
Crazy.
especially in New York.
It was crazy times. And then, so I got a very super, my first job, and it was a wonderful job. Back in the day, they had the big 8 accounting firms,
Yeah.
and I went to work for one of them, and people were like, oh my God, accountants. And let me say something. I had a group of friends, and there was a few of us females, and we had this great guy friendship. And we would go to their softball games, and then we would go to an Irish pub and drink till like 4 a.m.
Yep.
So not all accountants are these boring people. That we had a great group of friends.
Well, you do know that this podcast and what I am, we are an accounting firm.
Oh, there you go. I mean,
So,
I
we are
love
an accounting firm. Yeah. So exactly. So yeah, I like to think some of us, have personalities. I was waiting to see where you were going to go with that, to see if you were going to say good or bad things. So I was going to leave you a little bit hanging, but you came through. Okay.
No, I had a great job. I really did. And I had a woman who mentored me, and she was mentoring me to take her job.
Mm-hmm.
And I stepped in it, kind of. It was,
Sure.
I started from the low part, and within 2 years, I was her assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was the one who was checking on, back then, it was secretaries. And, if you had a selective typewriter, IBM typewriter that corrected,
Yeah.
it was like, wow, that was big. And so you're managing, and I worked in the audit department, so it was huge. It was like 500 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the support staff was about 40 people. So it was like, who came in late, who's taking vacation.
Sure.
But it was great. And here's where it goes off the rails a bit. But I still kept one foot in the rock world. And it was funny because there would be guy friends or boyfriends who would come to see me, and they had their platform shoes and their skin, and the long
Yeah.
hair. And the guys that I would hang out with would peek over the cubicles, and they were like, "Oh, he's here for Beth. There's no doubt he's here for Beth." And so that was kind of fun. And eventually, I kind of, and back in the day, they would say, you sold out. You on the route. And it's like, well, you do need to make a living.
Yeah.
And some of those friends that I have are still doing that. They're still, and they're not paying Social Security. They're not, and some of them are in a bad way because, back then the club business was cash, so you're not paying taxes, you're not paying into Social Security, and some of them are actually a little hard up because of that. And so I like to say I was always still a rocker, but yes, I did take a straighter path, but I never left I want to sing, I want to act.
Yeah. That creativity, that creative side of your brain was always there.
Is always there. So, and then I will say this: I did marry a boring accountant. My
wife tells me that all the time.
No, you don't seem boring. This guy was my total opposite. And, people say, oh, opposites attract. And they attract for a little while. And then you realize, like I raised my kids in listening to the Beatles, the Stones, Van Halen and this and that. And so by the time they were 5 or 6 years old, they were well equipped in music because I never stopped that. And their father had like we came from two different worlds.
Right.
And I lived in Hawaii at the time. I lived in Honolulu. He took a job in Honolulu, and I followed him. And the woman who was mentoring me, she said, "I'm leaving your job open for a year." And after a year, I really thought I was going back to New York because it was just like, Hawaii is a great place to go to. And I will say that, but to live there. And I knew even after a year that, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know what made me decide to stay there. But the one thing, I have 3 beautiful daughters who were born there. And I lived there for a long time. And even though I was considered a kama'aina, which means like you may not have been born here, but you're Hawaiian.
Yeah, sure.
And I never, I was very involved in my kids' school. I worked at the school, and I just didn't get that ohana, which means, home and all that.
Yeah, of course.
And people would say, "You're still that New York girl." And I'm like, I can't help it. That's who I am.
That's who you are. That's what was instilled in you.
Right. So I eventually said, yeah, I can't do this anymore. And you get to a point in your life, and I had a very privileged life. I will say that. And people would say, "You have everything. Why are you leaving?" And I said, "Because I'm not happy."
Right.
And I said, "There's nothing that's going to change my mind." And it was a little bit of a battle to get my daughters out of the state of Hawaii back to New York, but I did. And I wanted my daughters to have that New York mentality, which they do. And my youngest lives in Brooklyn, and my middle daughter is, like all the side roads that I used to know, she'd be driving them. So I was like, okay, so, they are New York girls.
Yeah.
two of them now live in Portland, Oregon, my oldest and my middle daughter. And that's cool. I mean, Portland's pretty cool, but I get to go back to New York, and my daughter lives in Brooklyn. And so I still have my connection to New York. And as a New Yorker, you could be away for 2 years and then you go back and you smell it. Now where my daughter lives, it just smells like weed. I mean, it's just all over the place.
Sure.
But you get on the street and your New Yorkness just comes right back.
It comes right back.
And I love that. And so I get to go back to New York. I get to go to Portland, which is a totally different vibe.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I enjoy it.
Good.
So all of that. And my creativity used to come out I would throw the best parties, and everybody in Honolulu wanted to be invited to my parties because that's where the creativeness goes.
Sure.
But back then is when I started formulating these books. And it kept coming and coming and coming. And, then I'm raising 3 girls, and then I'm a single mother, and I'm working at IBM. I got a great job there. And yes, it comes up. And you're like, what do I do with this? I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. And then it just started, all the stories, and there's 4 of them. And they play through my head. And this one in particular, just what kept coming at me. And I said, and there's a little bit of myself. The other stories, there's nothing about me. Maybe I make a little bit, but this one was personal. And I said, no, I got to write it. And I haven't stopped writing. And I know some people say, oh, writer's block. Like I'm formulating in my head the second book, the third book.
Right.
The fourth book I know is going to be historical fiction. So that's like a lot of research.
Yeah, sure.
And I had to do research on this book because if they're going to do a cover of something, I had to look because I knew at the time the year and even the month is important. And I would look it up and say, okay, this song, we're in the summer. This song doesn't come out till September. I can't use that song.
Right. You want to make it as authentic and right.
Right. So, but I do move the book through, record deals and being bound to record companies and the changes in the music industry, which was, MTV became like a big deal. And you and I know that if your video made it on MTV,
that was it.
You made it, you know. And we know that there were some one-hit wonders that also happened.
Still happens now.
Yeah, but so I go through all that, and now every band, not every, but most of them have their own recording studios. So they put out their music, and now we have streaming and, iHeartRadio and all that stuff. And so they record their songs and then they sprinkle them out, right? And they put them on the streaming, they put it on iHeart or whatever. And so now they have more control.
Yeah.
And so I bring the band all the way to that point. And you have to be authentic. It's like a 20-year span that I'm talking about.
Right.
So I need to make everything real. Otherwise, somebody's going to come back at me and say, she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Right. You lose credibility.
And I do know what I'm talking about. So it's like, okay, and like I said, there is a little research that goes on and you need to do that. And I do have a proofreader Because sometimes my timeline, I lose track of it. And she's there to keep me on my timeline to she gives me this like novel, and she tells me who all the characters are, because somebody that I mentioned in book 2, if I'm writing in book 4, I'm like, was that this name or was it that name? And then I look through her stuff, or I actually have my author's copy of my books, and then I go back and say, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But these are the things that people, I know a lot of people believe, and you can do it, that first of all, Amazon does not accept books, right? They need to come to you.
Okay.
Like I solicited them and I said, I have this book. And they're like, yeah, well, we don't do that. We come to you. Now, there is a site actually who they make it look like they're Amazon, but they're not. They're one of these self-publishing, what I call fakers. And so, yes, people can do that. You can upload your story and maybe get somebody to do your cover, and the book's not edited and it's not formatted correctly. And so what? You put your book up there. And if you're doing it for a vanity piece, fine. But if you want to make it a business, as I do, you need to have all those things, which is a great editor, a great proofreader. I have a phenomenal artist. She does my website. She does the book formatting. And I have a fantastic marketing person. And I will say this. Right now, I'm book 3 is ready. And I just need to now call my publishing consultant and my editor and say, okay, let's go. But it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And people need to realize that if you're going to do it right,
you gotta spend the money.
It's tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So I think in the beginning of February, everybody's going to get a call and say, okay, we're ready for book 3. But my marketing person hasn't stopped working. We're still promoting book 1, book 2, and that is the thing that you really need to focus on. And it does take money. Not only are you paying the marketer, but there's things you have to do promoting the book that costs money. And so you need to be aware that is the marketing part of the book is the hugest thing.
As we're wrapping up, how can people find your book? You mentioned a website, so.
I do have a website, which I put all my podcasts on, by the way.
Okay.
It's perfectionsaga.com. And there is a little link that will bring you right to Amazon. And the books are on Amazon. And it's, you can either put in my name or Perfection Saga, and it will be playing hard and playing high. And, I'm on all social media platforms. So I try to have a big presence because that's another part of
that's all part of the marketing. Yeah. Social media is very big right now.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, Leslie, I appreciate you coming on. Very, very interesting. You definitely had a very, very interesting journey to get to where you are. Definitely some very cool stories there. And I wish you were getting the rest of the saga out there.
Yeah, well, what I'm really hoping for, because I did write songs, I wrote lyrics, I wrote about 16 songs. So I'm hoping that there's a band out there or somebody who wants to put music to my songs, because I know how I want them to go. And long-term goal, and everybody says this to me, is like, your books could be a series on. And so
they have a lot now, all those those limited series kind of things where
that's what I'm aiming for,
like a one season kind of thing. Well, that would be that happens, you let me know, and I will be the first one to watch it.
I will come back on, and
That would be wonderful. We would love that.
Yeah, I would love it.
Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On-Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.